My father used to say, "Never judge a piece of land by the fences you can see. Judge it by the gate nobody else notices." I didn't understand what he meant until the morning I drove over the last hill toward my family's ranch and realized 60 brand new houses had appeared where my cattle used to graze. The smell of fresh asphalt reached me before I even rolled down the truck window. It mixed with cedar dust and the familiar scent of dry summer grass, creating something that felt deeply wrong. My tires crunched over the old gravel trail I'd driven since I was 12, but halfway down the hill the sound disappeared beneath smooth black pavement that definitely hadn't been there 6 months earlier. I slowed to a stop. Below me stretched neat rows of identical homes with spotless white fences, trimmed lawns, shiny mailboxes, and a clubhouse flying an HOA flag that fluttered proudly in the Texas breeze. Children rode bicycles across what used to be my grandfather's eastern pasture. A woman walked a golden retriever along the creek where I had learned to fish with Dad. Someone had even planted decorative maple trees beside the old stock pond. For a second, I wondered if I'd taken the wrong road. Then I saw the rusted windmill standing exactly where it had always stood. My stomach tightened. This was my ranch. Every inch of it. The engine idled quietly while I stared through the windshield, unable to connect the memories in my head with the picture in front of my eyes. 40 years of family history had somehow been buried beneath fresh concrete, beige siding, and HOA landscaping. The metallic taste of adrenaline settled on my tongue as I climbed out of the truck. Warm wind carried the distant hum of lawn mowers, the laughter of children, and the steady splash of a decorative fountain that had no business existing on my property. A polished stone monument greeted visitors near the entrance. Silver letters across the front read, "Silver Creek Estates." Underneath sat another plaque that proudly declared, "Luxury Community, living since 2025. I reached down and brushed away a layer of construction dust covering one corner of the monument. Beneath it, barely visible, was one of the original granite survey markers my grandfather had installed decades ago. They hadn't removed it. They had simply built around it. That's when the first crack appeared in the perfect picture. Before I could walk any farther, a white luxury SUV rolled toward me. The driver lowered her window just enough to offer an expensive smile that never reached her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked politely, as though I were the stranger standing on someone else's land. I introduced myself. "My name is Ethan Calloway. My family owns this ranch." Her smile didn't fade. If anything, it became more confident. "I'm Rebecca Holloway, president of the Silver Creek Estates HOA. According to every document that matters, you're mistaken." She handed me a thick envelope before driving away without another word. The paper felt heavy in my hands. Fresh printer ink still carried that sharp chemical smell as I opened it beside my truck. The first page wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a lawsuit. They weren't asking permission to stay. They were suing me because I refused to keep my private ranch road permanently open for their 60 homeowners. I looked up from the papers toward the paved road disappearing through my southern gate, and for the first time in my life, I remembered my father's warning almost word for word. Never sell the gate. One day, everyone will need it more than you do. People like to say land is just dirt. They couldn't be more wrong. Dirt remembers every boot that crossed it, every fence that stood on it, and every promise made over it. My family had been making those promises on Calloway Ranch long before Silver Creek Estates existed as a name on somebody's marketing brochure. My grandfather, Walter Calloway, bought the first 200 acres in 1958 after returning from Korea with little more than a pickup truck, a borrowed shovel, and a stubborn belief that a man should own the ground beneath his boots. He expanded the ranch one pasture at a time, never gambling, never borrowing more than he could repay, and never selling an acre simply because developers waved bigger checks in front of him. My father inherited that same philosophy. Growing up, I measured seasons by cattle drives instead of calendars. Spring smelled like fresh cedar pollen drifting across the hills. Summer meant repairing fences beneath a sun hot enough to soften the tar on our boots. Autumn carried the scent of hay and diesel, while winter mornings echoed with the metallic clank of gates before sunrise. Every memory I had was tied to this place. The old red barn where Dad taught me to weld. The creek where Mom packed sandwiches during branding season. The weathered oak beside the southern entrance where Grandpa carved our family initials almost 60 years earlier. That southern entrance wasn't impressive. It wasn't lined with stone columns or electronic security gates. Just a gravel road leading to a steel ranch gate painted dark green every other spring. Visitors barely noticed it because there wasn't anything glamorous about it. But Dad always insisted we keep it perfect. Every hinge stayed greased. Every cattle guard stayed level. Every survey marker beside that road remained exactly where the county placed it decades ago. Whenever I asked why he obsessed over one ordinary gate while ignoring flashier improvements around the ranch, he'd simply smile and repeat the same sentence. One day this gate will matter more than the entire ranch. I thought he was talking about cattle, maybe preventing trespassers. I certainly never imagined 60 luxury homes would someday depend on that stretch of gravel more than my own herd ever had. After my parents passed within 3 years of each other, I became the last Calloway still living full-time on the property. I leased part of the western pasture to neighboring ranchers while traveling throughout Texas restoring old windmills and irrigation systems. The work paid well, and it let me preserve the ranch without selling pieces of it to developers circling the county like vultures. Before every trip, I'd walk the property lines myself. I'd check every fence corner, every creek crossing, every survey monument buried beneath layers of grass. My father used to joke that maps can lie, but granite never does. That habit probably saved me more than once. Looking back now, I realize something else. During all those years, not a single member of any HOA ever introduced themselves. No developer knocked on my front door asking about easements. No survey crew requested access to my southern road. No attorney mailed questions about ownership. Instead, while I was restoring windmills hundreds of miles away, someone quietly built an entire suburban neighborhood beside my family's history and somehow convinced everyone living there that they belonged. Standing beside that lawsuit, with my father's old gate visible in the distance, I finally understood that this fight had never been about houses. It was about the one thing my family had protected for nearly 70 years without ever explaining why. Rebecca Holloway didn't walk toward me like someone surprised to find a ranch owner standing in the middle of her new neighborhood. She walked like a woman arriving late to a meeting she already controlled. Her white SUV rolled beside the curb with barely a whisper, polished so clean it reflected the rows of houses behind her. When she stepped out, the smell of expensive perfume cut through the dust and asphalt like a chemical warning. She wore cream-colored slacks, gold bracelets, and the kind of smile people use when they have already decided you are beneath them. "Mr. Calloway," she said, holding my name like something unpleasant between two fingers. "I understand this must feel confusing." Confusing. That was the word she chose for 60 homes sitting on my ranch. I looked past her at the clubhouse, the fountain, the fresh sod still showing square seams where workers had rolled it out over what used to be mesquite grass. "No," I said. "Confusing is losing your keys. This is trespassing with landscaping." Her smile twitched just once. Then the polished version returned. Silver Creek Estates was approved by the county, financed properly, inspected properly, and sold to families who did nothing wrong. She opened a leather folder and showed me copies of permits, plats, and glossy development maps marked with neat colored lines. Everything looked official. That was the dangerous part. Bad lies look dirty. Professional lies arrive in binders. Rebecca tapped one manicured nail against the map. "Your family's unused acreage was incorporated into the planned community after a lawful boundary adjustment." The phrase sounded rehearsed. Smooth. Empty. I asked for the deed transfer. Her eyes cooled. "That will be handled through council." There it was. The first crack under the perfume. She didn't have an answer. She had confidence instead. A small crowd had gathered by then. Homeowners stood on sidewalks holding coffee cups, phones angled low, recording just enough to make me look aggressive if I raised my voice. Rebecca knew exactly what she was doing. She lowered her tone, soft enough to sound reasonable, loud enough for everyone to hear. "These people purchased their homes in good faith. You showing up and threatening access creates a serious public safety issue." I hadn't threatened anyone. I hadn't even touched the gate. But she was already building the story. Me, the angry rancher. Her, the calm protector of families. Then she pointed toward the southern road. "That entrance is now the community's only practical exit. Emergency vehicles, school buses, delivery services, everyone depends on it. You cannot simply decide to interfere because of an old family misunderstanding." Old family misunderstanding. My jaw tightened hard enough to ache. I could hear my father's voice in my head, quiet and steady, telling me never to argue with someone who needs an audience. So I didn't. I folded the lawsuit back into its envelope and looked at the granite survey marker half buried beside her stone monument. Rebecca followed my gaze, then smiled again. Those old markers are probably inaccurate by now. That was her second mistake. Granite does not forget. Paint fades. Paper burns. People lie. But that marker had been sitting in Texas dirt since before Rebecca learned to weaponize bylaws. I didn't say that out loud. I just brushed the dust from its top with my thumb and felt the carved county number beneath my skin. Rebecca turned away, satisfied she had won the scene. The homeowners kept recording. The fountain kept splashing. And under all that suburban noise, the first real piece of evidence sat quietly at my feet. By the next morning, Rebecca's version of the story had spread farther than the smell of fresh-cut grass drifting across Silver Creek Estates. My phone buzzed nonstop while I sat at the old kitchen table where my grandfather used to balance ranch ledgers with a pencil worn down to the size of his thumb. Friends I'd known for years were forwarding screenshots from neighborhood groups and local community pages. Every headline painted the same picture. Local ranch owner threatens access to 60 families. Private landowner attempts to block emergency vehicles. Community faces uncertain future after property dispute. It was amazing how quickly the truth could disappear once someone wrapped a lie in polished language. The comments were worse. People I'd never met called me greedy. Others accused me of trying to extort homeowners who had invested their life savings into their dream houses. One man suggested the county should seize my ranch under eminent domain for the public good. Reading that sentence while sitting inside a house my grandfather built with his own hands left a bitter taste in my mouth stronger than the black coffee growing cold beside me. Rebecca wasn't fighting me in court yet. She was preparing the jury outside the courtroom. Around noon, the first delivery truck rumbled down the southern road. Then came another. By sunset, I'd counted moving vans, furniture trailers, internet contractors, landscapers, propane deliveries, and a school district survey vehicle. Every tire rolled across my private ranch road like ownership had already changed hands. The gravel shoulders my father repaired every spring were disappearing beneath constant traffic. Fine dust settled across the wildflowers lining the fence, coating them in gray powder. Every passing truck shook the old cattle guard with a metallic groan I had never heard before. The ranch itself sounded restless. Even the cattle stayed farther back from the road than usual. Late that afternoon, a sheriff's deputy pulled into my driveway. Deputy Nolan Pierce stepped out, removed his sunglasses, and sighed before saying a single word. "Ethan, I figured I'd find you here. We'd known each other since high school rodeos." He wasn't there to arrest me. He was there because someone had filed yet another complaint. According to the report, I'd been intimidating residents by watching traffic from my own property. I actually laughed. "Watching?" He nodded awkwardly. "Apparently standing near your own fence makes people uncomfortable." The absurdity hung in the hot afternoon air between us. Nolan rubbed the back of his neck before lowering his voice. "Off the record, someone's filing these complaints almost every few hours. Different names. Same wording. Whoever's doing it wants a paper trail." That sentence stayed with me long after he drove away. They weren't trying to prove I had done something wrong. They were manufacturing the appearance that I eventually would. By evening, a certified envelope arrived from Rebecca's attorneys. They demanded immediate written confirmation that I would never interfere with unrestricted access to the southern road. If I refused, they would seek an emergency court order, damages, attorney fees, and additional penalties for every homeowner allegedly affected. The legal language stretched across 12 pages, but every paragraph boiled down to one message: surrender quietly. I folded the papers, carried them onto the porch, and looked toward the old green gate glowing orange beneath the setting sun. The hinges creaked softly in the evening breeze, the exact same sound I'd heard since childhood. Everyone around me seemed convinced that gate already belonged to the neighborhood. The strange part was that nobody, not Rebecca, not her lawyers, not the county, not even the homeowners asking for sympathy, had ever produced a single document proving it. The first lawyer I hired wore a charcoal suit, polished shoes, and the exhausted expression of a man who charged by the hour before delivering bad news. His office smelled like leather chairs, printer toner, and burnt coffee. He spread Rebecca's lawsuit across his desk, flipped through the exhibits, and kept making that quiet clicking sound with his pen. Every click made my patience thinner. Finally, he leaned back and said, "Mr. Calloway, this could get expensive." That was lawyer language for ugly. I asked him if they had a case. He didn't answer right away, which told me more than words would have. "They have homeowners in place," he said. "They have county approvals. They have utility connections, emergency service concerns, and 60 families who can claim they relied on the developer's representations." I stared at him. That wasn't my question. His pen clicked again. "Can you win?" "Maybe." "Can they bury you long enough to force a settlement?" "Absolutely." The room seemed to shrink around me. Outside his window, traffic hissed over wet pavement from a passing storm, steady and indifferent. He explained temporary injunctions, implied easements, public necessity arguments, court delays, expert witnesses, survey disputes, and legal fees that could climb past 6 figures before a judge ever reached the real question. Who owned the road? When he slid his retainer agreement across the desk, the number at the bottom hit harder than any insult Rebecca had thrown. I had rebuilt windmills in 100-degree heat, patched water lines in freezing mud, and stretched ranch money through drought years, but I couldn't outspend an HOA backed by a developer, title companies, and homeowners terrified of losing access. That was their pressure point. They didn't need to be right. They just needed to make being right unaffordable. Driving home, I passed the southern entrance and saw 3 moving trucks waiting at the gate like steel animals. A young mother in a blue minivan glared at me as if I had personally ruined her life. Her little boy pressed his face to the window, leaving fog on the glass. That image bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Rebecca had placed families between me and the truth, then dared me to push back. By dusk, local news vans had parked near the clubhouse. Bright lights washed over the perfect lawns while Rebecca stood before a camera in a navy blazer, speaking with practiced concern. I couldn't hear every word from where I stood behind my fence, but I caught enough. Safety, stability, community, families. She used those words like fence posts, building a cage around the public sympathy. A reporter later shoved a microphone toward me and asked why I wanted to trap residents inside their own neighborhood. The question was so loaded I almost answered with anger. Almost. Instead, I looked at the camera and said, "I want the truth on paper." That clip never aired. What aired was Rebecca comforting a crying homeowner beside the fountain. That night, I sat alone in my father's workshop, listening to rain tick against the tin roof. The old place smelled like motor oil, dust, and cedar shavings. My hands rested on his workbench, worn smooth where he had sharpened tools for 40 years. For the first time since finding those houses, I felt the weight of maybe losing. Not because they owned the road, because they controlled the noise around it. Then my elbow bumped an old coffee can full of keys. One fell out and skidded across the bench. Small, rusted, painted dark green. The key to the southern gate. The little green key felt heavier than it should have. Rust stained my fingertips as I turned it over beneath the yellow light hanging above my father's workbench. A faded strip of masking tape still clung to the ring. My mother's handwriting had almost disappeared, but one word remained clear enough to read. South. I set the key beside the lawsuit and stared at both of them in silence. One represented everything Rebecca wanted me to believe. The other represented everything my family had spent decades protecting. Around midnight, I climbed the narrow wooden stairs leading into the loft above the workshop. Hardly anyone ever went up there anymore. The air smelled of old pine, dust, engine oil, and forgotten summers. Every step groaned beneath my boots. Moonlight slipped through the warped boards, cutting pale lines across stacks of weathered boxes. My flashlight beam landed on a metal filing cabinet tucked beneath a canvas tarp. I hadn't opened it since Dad's funeral. The lock resisted at first before finally giving way with a dry metallic snap. Inside sat dozens of thick folders tied together with faded cotton string. Tax records, livestock registrations, insurance policies, survey invoices. My father never threw away paperwork. He used to joke that paper outlives memory. I spent hours opening drawer after drawer until one brittle envelope caught my attention. Across the front, written in my grandfather's block handwriting, were 4 simple words. Southern access, never sell. My pulse quickened. Inside lay folded survey maps drawn by hand before satellite imaging existed. The paper crackled as I spread it across the workbench downstairs. Every creek, fence line, cattle guard, and property corner matched the ranch exactly. Then I noticed something modern survey copies never included. A bold red outline surrounded the southern road from the county highway all the way to the ranch interior. Along the margin, Grandpa had written a note in blue ink. Exclusive private access. No easement granted under any circumstance. I frowned. If that note was accurate, Rebecca's entire argument rested on nothing. But handwritten notes wouldn't survive a courtroom. I kept digging. Beneath the maps rested a sealed tube containing certified survey plats stamped by the county nearly 60 years earlier. The raised seal was still visible beneath my flashlight. Even better, clipped behind them was a title opinion prepared when my grandparents refinanced the ranch decades ago. I scanned line after line until one sentence stopped me cold. No recorded ingress or egress rights benefiting adjoining parcels through the southern ranch road. I read it again, then a third time. The words didn't change. My heartbeat echoed inside the quiet workshop louder than the ticking clock on the wall. Every argument Rebecca had repeated about community access depended on one thing existing: an easement. And according to every document my family had preserved, none had ever been created. The realization settled over me slowly, like sunrise pushing away darkness. The 60 homes might have been legally built. Their foundations, permits, inspections, and mortgages could all be perfectly valid. But legal houses did not magically create legal access across someone else's land. I spread every map across the workbench until the entire history of Calloway Ranch lay before me. The southern road connected every page like a spine running through a book. Suddenly, my father's obsession with that ordinary green gate no longer seemed strange. It had never been about the gate itself. It had always been about the only road behind it. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I realized Rebecca wasn't protecting 60 homeowners. She was desperately hiding one missing document that should have existed, but didn't. By sunrise, I stopped feeling angry and started feeling careful. Anger makes noise. Care makes records. I photographed every document beneath clean light, scanned each page twice, and placed the originals inside my father's old fireproof safe. Then I called the one person in the county who cared more about numbers than opinions. Her name was Allison Mercer, a licensed surveyor with mud on her boots, silver hair tied under a faded ball cap, and the calm voice of someone who had ruined more than one developer's week. She arrived before noon in a white truck filled with tripods, stakes, measuring rods, and enough equipment to make Rebecca's glossy maps look like children's drawings. The moment Allison stepped out, she didn't ask about the lawsuit. She crouched beside the granite marker near the monument and brushed dirt from the carved county number with her thumb. "Well," she said, "that's interesting." Those 3 words did more for my blood pressure than the lawyer had done in 2 hours. For the next 6 hours, we walked the southern road inch by inch. The July heat pressed against my neck. Grasshoppers snapped through the dry weeds. Her equipment beeped softly while trucks from Silver Creek rolled past us, drivers slowing down to stare. I said nothing. Allison said even less. Every few hundred feet, she drove a bright orange survey stake into the ground. Not beside the road. Not near the road. Directly along the legal boundary that proved the pavement sat inside Calloway Ranch property. By late afternoon, the southern entrance looked like it had grown a spine of warning flags. Rebecca appeared just as Allison was photographing the cattle guard. She marched across the pavement with 2 board members behind her and a phone already recording. "You cannot obstruct a community access point," she said. Allison didn't even look up. "I'm not obstructing anything. I'm documenting." Rebecca turned to me. "This is harassment." I wiped dust from my palms and kept my voice flat. "No, Rebecca. This is surveying." Her smile stiffened. She hated calm more than anger because calm didn't give her anything useful. That evening, my new attorney, Daniel Whitaker, reviewed the documents in my kitchen while thunderheads gathered over the pasture. Unlike the first lawyer, Daniel didn't click a pen or soften the truth. He read quietly, then tapped the title opinion with one finger. "If this holds, they don't have an access problem. They have a title insurance disaster." The words rolled through the room like distant thunder. He drafted notices that night. Formal, precise, cold enough to frost glass. The letters went to Rebecca, the HOA board, the developer, the county, the title company, the mortgage lenders, and every emergency service department. We did not block ambulances. We did not threaten families. We simply gave notice that unrestricted private access across Calloway Ranch had never been granted and would end unless a lawful agreement existed. Then came the gate. Not a dramatic wall. Not concrete barricades. Just a heavy steel ranch gate installed exactly on my land. Exactly where the survey confirmed it belonged, with cameras watching from 2 angles and a sign bolted cleanly to the post. Private ranch road. Authorized access only. Emergency vehicles exempt. At dawn the next morning, I slid the old green key into the new lock. The metal clicked once. Quiet. Final. Somewhere beyond the curve, sprinklers hissed across 60 perfect lawns. And for the first time, Silver Creek Estates heard the sound my father had protected for 70 years. The first 24 hours after I locked the gate were almost disappointingly quiet. No shouting. No police sirens. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence broken by the occasional click of the security cameras following vehicles that slowed to a stop in front of the new steel gate. Then the dominoes started falling. At 7:10 that morning, a delivery truck loaded with kitchen appliances backed up nearly a quarter mile before turning around. At 7:42, the school bus stopped outside the entrance while confused parents gathered along the sidewalk with sleepy children clutching backpacks. By 8 o'clock, landscaping trailers lined the shoulder of the highway. Every driver climbed out, looked at the sign, made a phone call, and left. I watched everything from the porch with a notebook on my lap. My father always believed memories were unreliable, but timestamps weren't. At 9:15, Rebecca's white SUV came flying down the neighborhood road faster than I'd ever seen anyone drive through Silver Creek Estates. Gravel sprayed beneath her tires as she slammed on the brakes in front of the gate. She jumped out holding a folder thick enough to be mistaken for a phone book. "Open it," she demanded before she even reached me. I stayed on my side of the fence. "Good morning, Rebecca." She ignored the greeting and waved the folder in the air. "You're creating a public emergency." "No," I answered calmly. "I'm exercising a private property right." Her face flushed. "People can't receive deliveries. That's unfortunate. Contractors can't finish homes. Also unfortunate. The garbage company refused to enter." I nodded once. "I heard." She took one step closer. "You're going to be liable for every dollar this costs." I almost smiled. "Then your attorneys should have no problem showing the easement that says otherwise." For the first time since I'd met her, Rebecca didn't respond immediately. She opened the folder, shuffled papers, closed it again, and looked toward the line of waiting vehicles behind her. That silence lasted barely 3 seconds, but it said more than any argument ever could. By lunchtime, the pressure had spread far beyond the HOA. My attorney called to tell me the title insurance company wanted copies of every survey. An hour later, the developer's legal team requested an emergency meeting. Before sunset, the county planning office asked for historical boundary records they had apparently never reviewed during the subdivision approval process. The calls kept coming because everyone had finally reached the same terrifying realization. If the southern road had never been legally secured, then every closing, every mortgage, every title policy, and every disclosure connected to those 60 homes carried a question no bank wanted to answer. The panic wasn't happening at my gate anymore. It was spreading through conference rooms filled with lawyers, insurers, lenders, and executives. Rebecca spent the afternoon pacing beside the locked entrance while frustrated homeowners surrounded her with questions she couldn't dodge. I couldn't hear every conversation, but I heard enough. Why didn't the developer tell us? Who owns the road? Can we even sell our houses? Every question struck her confidence like another crack in glass. As the sun dropped behind the hills, Daniel called again. His voice carried something I hadn't heard before. Satisfaction. "They've withdrawn their motion for an emergency injunction," he said, "and they want to negotiate immediately." I looked toward the old granite survey marker standing quietly beside the polished monument for Silver Creek Estates. It hadn't moved an inch through decades of storms, droughts, or bulldozers. Neither had the truth. All it had needed was enough time for everyone else to stop talking and finally read the map. The negotiation happened in a glass conference room that smelled like coffee, printer toner, and fear. Rebecca sat across from me with her attorney on one side and the developer's attorney on the other. She didn't look like a queen anymore. She looked like someone who had finally realized the throne had been built on someone else's land. Daniel placed the certified survey on the table first, then the title opinion, then the historical plats. One by one, every document landed softly, but each one hit harder than a hammer. The developer tried blaming a mapping error. The title company blamed incomplete disclosures. The HOA blamed the developer. Rebecca blamed everyone except herself. I said almost nothing. My father taught me that when the truth is doing the work, a man shouldn't interrupt it. By the end of the week, the lawsuit against me was dismissed with prejudice. The HOA signed a permanent access agreement on my terms. Not ownership, not public dedication. A paid easement, limited, insured, recorded, and revocable for violations. They paid for road maintenance, security cameras, legal fees, survey costs, damages to my fence line, and a settlement large enough to restore every neglected acre of Calloway Ranch. Rebecca resigned 2 days later. The developer faced state investigation. The county quietly changed its approval procedures. As for the homeowners, most of them eventually understood. Some even apologized. One man brought over a pie his wife had baked and admitted they had never been shown the access documents before closing. I didn't hate them. They had bought houses. Rebecca and the developer had sold them a lie. 3 months later, the southern road looked different, but right. Fresh gravel lined both shoulders. The cattle guard had been repaired. The old granite marker stood uncovered beside the entrance, protected now by a low iron frame. And the gate, my father's gate, still stood there, dark green under the morning sun. One dawn, I unlocked it with that rusted little key and heard the familiar click roll through the quiet air. Beyond it, sprinklers hissed over Silver Creek lawns. Behind me, cattle moved through the pasture like nothing had changed. But everything had. My family kept the ranch. The neighborhood kept its access. And Rebecca learned what every bully learns eventually. Paperwork only works until someone brings the real deed. I stood there with dust on my boots, cedar in the wind, and my father's voice finally making sense in my chest. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't need cameras, speeches, or a crowd. Sometimes it's just a gate, a key, and a truth patient enough to wait 70 years.